Welcome to In Focus Maine. I'm Josh Robin. This is a new weekly public affairs show that explores the issues that impact Mainers. Each show will feature in-depth, balanced discussions with a diverse group of newsmakers, from government officials to expert analysts and community leaders. We begin this week with Republican Senator Susan Collins. Over her 5 terms in the U.S. Senate, Senator Collins has built a reputation for being one of the chamber's most bipartisan members. We recently had a chance to spend a day with her in Maine, talking about everything from the upcoming presidential election to the project she's working on closer to home. The day started here at a firehouse in Newburgh, Maine.
And I love that it's red.
I did too.
Fire into red.
I should have worn my red today.
It's a project she helped to fund.
Thanks for all that you do. Really appreciate it. The town put in $500,000, which was a substantial amount for a town of this size to contribute. I was able to secure an additional $1 million that allowed the project to go forward.
First truck, day one.
Fire Chief Brent Summers says the new station was sorely needed.
The old building was in very rough shape. It was leaking water. As we always joke, it rained harder inside than it did outside. And we had a lot of black mold. It was coming out from the ceilings, the walls. Health-wise, it was a huge concern for the guys. Now they can't wait to get here.
And would we be here without the federal grant?
Absolutely not.
So are the hoses different sizes?
The senator says stories like these remind her of the importance of her work.
There is some controversy, as you know, in Washington about having congressionally directed spending projects. My view has always been that I have a better sense of what communities in the state of Maine need. So what I love about days like this is it makes my work very concrete. It shows me the real results that fighting for that money produces back home in communities like this.
Her afternoon stop focused on making a different kind of change.
Do you have any advice to somebody who wants to go into a career in a different space that has fewer women than it does men?
I definitely do. The first is that you do have to believe in yourself.
Inspiring the next generation. She spoke with students from the Cohen Institute High School Leadership Program at the University of Maine.
I was asked to come today to talk to them about leadership and service. I hope also that I might inspire some of them to get involved in community service, to run for office, and to envision themselves as policymakers.
I wondered if you generally are optimistic about the future of this country.
I am, and I think one reason why is I do visit a lot of schools. When you see these young people and talk to them, it gives you a great sense of hope for our country and a feeling that we can get back on track. And I believe that we can, and that the future will be bright because of them.
After the break, Senator Collins talks with us about the issues she's working on for the people of Maine. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. I'm Josh Robin. Maine Senator Susan Collins is serving her 5th term representing her state. She told us what being a Mainer means to her. So you grew up about 3 hours or so from here. Can you talk about how the town of Caribou shaped who you are?
When I was growing up, we went back to school in August, then after 3 weeks would recess for 3 weeks so that the children could help the potato farmers get the crop in before the cold weather made it impossible. And that sense of community is something that I learned at a very early age. I also had parents who were very active in public service at both the community and state level.
Yeah, did you think at that time that you wanted to do anything else other than to go into public office?
Oh, I didn't think I was going to end up being in the Senate or in public office, even though both my parents served as mayor of Caribou in the state Senate. My father served, and my mother served as chair of the University of Maine System Board of Trustees. So I always thought I would do some sort of community service, but I never would have guessed I'd be in the United States Senate. At that point in my life, I wanted to be all sorts of things. A school librarian, and when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a ballerina. I wanted to be a dentist at one point. I mean, you name it, I considered it.
So what was the hook that got you not only interested in politics, which you were because of your parents, but just generally, what made you want to make the leap yourself?
When I was in high school, I was one of 2 students from Maine who participated in what is known as the Senate Youth Program. And it was a week in Washington, and this was so exciting to me. Keep in mind, this was back in 1971, and I'd never flown on an airplane, I'd never been to Washington, I'd never met my senators. And my senators were Edmund Muskie and Margaret Chase Smith. Margaret Chase Smith was the only woman serving in the Senate at that time. And she spent a great deal of time talking with me. In fact, I marvel at how long she spent. She spent nearly 2 hours talking with this high school girl from Caribou, Maine. And when I left her office, I remember thinking that women could do anything, although I had no idea that in some ways it was the first step in my journey to the United States Senate, and today I hold her seat.
Do you think that women are held to a different standard than men?
I actually do. Women have to prove that we belong in the Senate. When a man's elected to the Senate, it's assumed that he belongs there. I feel there's a test in a way, and once you demonstrate your ability, then you're accepted into the club.
So you talked to a number of your constituents today. What is there are obviously different issues that you hear from different people, but is there one that you hear more than others, more than any others?
Absolutely, it's the cost of living. And every week when I go to the grocery store, people stop me and say, can you believe the price of bacon or the price of eggs? Just normal things that people are buying. And I will see people take something, a pound of hamburger, for example, and look at it and put it back. And I know that's because of the cost. The cost of gasoline remains high. It's lower than it was, but not by much. Maine's a big rural state. We don't have a lot of public transportation. You have to travel long distances by car. Heating our homes is very expensive, and Maine is more dependent on home heating oil than any state in the nation. More than 60% of our homes use heating oil. So it's the cost of living that comes up the most.
Can you talk about this odd trend of homes that have been taken over in Maine and turned into marijuana farms?
This is an extremely serious problem in Maine. What we are seeing is houses in rural Maine, and there may be as many as 200 of them, which have been taken over by transnational criminal organizations associated with China, and they're being used to grow marijuana. Now, marijuana happens to be legal in the state of Maine, but that's not what we're talking about here. These are illegal growing operations that are ruining the houses that are being used, that are consuming enormous amounts of electricity, but much more important and disturbing, they pose a public health threat and a national security threat.
So this isn't just petty crime?
I don't think it's petty crime at all. I think the money is being laundered to bring more fentanyl into this country.
Maine also made international headlines tragically for the shooting in Lewiston, and you have been involved subsequently to try to learn from it and to try to prevent something like this happening, not just in Maine, but across the United States.
That day in October of last year, October 25th, was the darkest day in Maine history in my life. It was horrible, with 18 people losing their lives, others being badly wounded. What I have been focused on is why didn't the Army alert the courts in Maine and trigger Maine's crisis intervention law, which would have allowed for a review by a court with help from a medical advisor of Robert Card's mental state. And I asked for the IG to do an investigation, the Inspector General to do an investigation. The Army Reserve has a long overdue investigation that will be coming out shortly. The Inspector General is reviewing the findings of that study. And I want to use the missed opportunities of that study, that study will reveal, to draft legislation that would require our services to report to the courts in laws that, in states that have crisis intervention laws like red flag or yellow flag laws, that a service member needs to be separated from his or her weapons if they pose a threat to themselves or others. In this case, we know that the military declared Robert Card to be non-deployable and took away its military weapons and actually helped him to be committed to a hospital in New York State specializing in mental illness. So to me, there were so many red flags and missed opportunities to separate him from his weapons.
So among the many things you're known for is your perfect attendance. You have not missed a roll call vote since 1997 when you were first elected. There are all kinds of questions I have about this, about the fact that you never missed a flight or never got sick. Can you tell us, though, why it was so important for you to make every vote?
This was inspired originally by Margaret Chase Smith. Margaret Chase Smith served for 13 years in the Senate without missing a vote. I thought that that was really cool, but it also mattered to me because I've been entrusted by the people of Maine with this responsibility, and I felt that I owed it to them to try to be present for every vote. It's something that, to me, honors the work ethic that I learned growing up in Maine, and it reflects my dedication to Maine people.
After the break, we'll hear from the senator about her thoughts on the presidential election. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. I'm Josh Robin. Senator Susan Collins is known as a Republican who's willing to work across the aisle. We spoke with her about her political philosophy. Let's shift gears a little bit to politics. You are the last Republican in New England. And I wondered if I could ask you what it means to you to be a Republican.
To me, being a Republican means that you believe in a strong national defense, peace through strength. In other words, it means that you believe in individual freedom, in personal responsibility, in a smaller government, and the free enterprise system. Those are pillars of the Republican Party and have been for a long time.
Are they still the pillars of the Republican Party?
They are still the pillars for many people in the Republican Party, but not all. I'm very concerned about the rise in isolationism in the Republican Party. It reminds me of right before World War II, when there were voices in America, the America First individuals, which I'm hearing echoes of today, and that really disturbs me. And I think it's very short-sighted in terms of our own country's freedoms being preserved. Another area is the Republican Party always has been a big believer in individual freedom. That means, for example, that we should trust a woman to make her own decisions when it comes to abortion in conjunction with her family and her doctor, up to the point of viability. I don't believe in those Democrats' views of allowing unlimited abortions at any point. But I do believe that the old standard that we had in Roe versus Wade was the appropriate line to draw.
You don't support the party's presumptive nominee, the former President Trump, for another term.
Correct.
I wonder why not say that you are now an independent? Why continue to call yourself a Republican if you don't support the nominee?
Because I do not support the Democratic nominee either. I have been extremely disappointed in President Biden. In addition, there are Republicans whom I would have happily voted for president. I endorsed Nikki Haley, and she would have been my first choice.
Why not support the former president?
I support some of President Trump's policies. For example, he is absolutely right that President Biden's border policies have been an utter disaster and have allowed dangerous people, including terrorists and criminals, into this country. But I also am a believer in legal immigration. That would help a state like Maine to get more young people, more healthcare workers into our state. And I believe in work permits for people who come here legally. A lot of it is President Trump's style as well. I think it's divisive at a time when our country is already so polarized. I want to see public leaders bring us together, not drive us further apart. And unfortunately, both the choices that we have this time are driving our country further apart.
If you don't mind my asking, who do you plan to vote for? Because isn't it a wasted vote not to vote for one or the other?
I'm going to write in Nikki Haley's name.
I think the most important piece of legislation over the last couple of years, which you were instrumental in, was the Electoral Count Reform Act. Can you talk a little bit about why it was important for you to champion that piece of legislation?
I saw on that January 6th what can happen if our peaceful process of counting the electoral votes is disrupted. I was there in the Senate chamber. I could hear the chants of "Hang Mike Pence" as our vice president did the right thing and would not disrupt or alter the electoral counts from the states. I started looking into the Electoral Count Act, a more than century-old law, and it needed to be clarified that the vice president's role was strictly ministerial, that the vice president had absolutely no authority to change, stop, or alter the vote. And I also realized that it was a terrible weakness that a state's count could be challenged by just one member of the House and the Senate. We raised that threshold to 20%, which I think was an incredibly important change.
And you subsequently voted to impeach the former president for his actions on that day, just to put it out there.
I did. And that's one reason that I simply cannot vote for him.
And how do you overcome this divide of distrust and polarization?
It's not easy at all, because what we've seen are groups on the far left and the far right who want 100% compliance with 100% of their views 100% of the time. And if you don't do that, they will run someone against you in a primary, and the lack of civility in their approach is very distressing. But I think we're better than that. We're a better country than that. When I have worked across the aisle, and I've been named the most bipartisan member of the Senate time and again, that's when we get the best legislation. The Electoral Count Act is a great example of that, where we came together, examined the current law, figured out what was wrong, and worked to strengthen and improve it.
Is there anything that you would like your constituents to know about how Congress operates?
I would like the people of this country to know that despite the extreme hyper-partisanship that we're seeing in Washington, that there are people who work hard every day for a better America and who come together on legislation to try to improve life for everyday Americans. We tend to work together, Democrats and Republicans, so I want the American people to have hope. And I also want them to realize that if they want the search for common ground to continue, that they need to elect more moderates, more people who are willing to work across the aisle. They need to be fanatical moderates. We have fanatical left-wingers, fanatical right-wingers. We need more centrists to be just as determined as those on the far left and the far right.
Well, this was fascinating. Thank you so much for your time, Senator Collins, and for having us into your home. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Great pleasure.
For In Focus, I'm Josh Robin. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.